Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I am Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Recession, inflation, interest rate hikes. Over the last few months, these terms have become a part of household discussions. And one question has taken center stage. Will there be a recession? Well, there is growing concern over the health of the global economy. The signs have not been encouraging at all. Fears of a global recession have only been growing. Today, those fears escalated. On Gravitas tonight, we summarize the developments of the last 24 hours. We take a step back to get you the bigger picture, piecing together for you what the global economic outlook is looking like. We tell you why the fears of a recession are only deepening and what this means for you and me. If you are an investor or a trader, I don't need to tell you that today was a bad day. Indian markets witnessed a bloodbath today. India's leading stock market index, the Sensex, was down by over 1,000 points. The Nifty, which represents the top 50 companies of India, fell by over 300 points. The global economy is vulnerable and the resilience of the rupee also is being tested. The rupee fell to a record low against the dollar today. It breached the 81 mark. Earlier today, $1 was worth 81.23 rupees. Thankfully, by the end of the day, we saw some recovery. The Indian currency closed just above the 81 mark. In recent weeks, the Indian Reserve Bank has stepped in. It has tried to defend the rupee. By selling dollars from its reserve, the RBI has deployed more than $80 billion so far this year. In September alone, the RBI sold $10 billion from its reserves. We can expect the RBI to make more such interventions in the future because of the hawkish sentiments within the global markets. But where is all this going? In recent months, the fears of a global recession have grown. We have been telling you about this. But is a recession certain? Is the worst now behind us? Or should we brace for more difficult times ahead? On Gravitas tonight, we will bring you an assessment of the global economy. Let's start off with the question that is on everyone's mind. Will there be a recession? The answer is this. Yes, there is a heightened likelihood of a global recession in the near future. Increasingly, global institutions and leading experts are issuing warnings. Last week, we told you what the World Bank has said. In its latest assessment, it said there is now a real risk of a recession, a real risk. And now another expert has spoken out. Economist Nouriel Roubini. He was one of the first experts who correctly predicted the 2008 financial crisis. He is now predicting another recession in 2023, and it will not be pretty. Here is what he said. I'm quoting, "It's not going to be a short and shallow recession. It's going to be severe, long, and ugly." a recession that will be severe, long and ugly. Dr. Rupee made that prediction for the United States. He believes that the US will enter a recession by the end of this year. And we all know by now, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Dr. Rupee believes that as well. He says once the recession in America begins, it will spread to the rest of the world. The downturn could last all through 2023. Central bankers seem to agree with that assessment. Recently, the US Federal Reserve announced a rate hike. The signs of distress are showing. America's economic growth this year is now pegged at 0.2%. That is significantly less than the earlier estimate. The US was hoping to grow at 1.7% just a few months back. Unemployment numbers are not looking good either. The US Fed expects joblessness to grow. Unemployment rate in the US will rise to 3.8% this year and 4.4% next year. These numbers come after a blunt warning from the Federal Reserve. Last month, the Federal Reserve chairperson had said households will feel the pain.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses. These are the unfortunate costs of reducing inflation. But a failure to restore price stability would mean far greater pain.
The question now is, how much more pain will Americans have to bear? When times are tough, there are no easy choices. Other major economies are realizing this as well. Europe and China, two major engines of growth, they are struggling as well. Let's tell you about Europe first. A recession seems certain there. There is a major shortage of energy that has pushed up the prices, and in turn, inflation has spiked. In August, inflation in Europe stood at well over a whopping 9%. There are supply disruptions. Unemployment has remained well above 6%. So all the warning signs are flashing red. The situation in China could be worse. Youth employment is close to 20%. GDP growth has fallen below 1%. Some of the economic pain in China is self-inflicted. The zero-COVID policies and repeated shutdowns have hit the Chinese economy hard. But remember, China is also the largest exporter of goods. So when global demand for goods goes down, production in China also will stumble. And it is happening already. Growth in exports has dropped from 18% in July to 7% in August. Where does this leave India? Yes, there are challenges, but so far the Indian economy has been insulated from the worst effects of the global slowdown. But countering the threat of a recession is not a one-time thing. It is an ongoing process. As the popular saying goes, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And there is something else that's affecting the global economic outlook, the war in Ukraine. Russia's invasion set off a chain of events that have put the global economy at risk. And now investors are worried that the conflict could cause more disruptions. Russia is making moves again. Referendums are happening in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine and the West say Russia plans to annex 4 regions. The move has been met with widespread condemnation. Here's a detailed report.
On Thursday, there was intense activity at this voting station in Donetsk. Banners were put up, polling booths were being prepared. An election officer conducted a quick survey of the site. He called on the locals to vote in a referendum that Ukraine and the West call illegitimate.
We grant the right to vote to all citizens of Donetsk People's Republic located in the territory of Donetsk People's Republic as well as abroad. Foreign referendum polling stations are open.
Donetsk isn't the only region holding a referendum. Several regions under Russian control in eastern Ukraine are holding similar votes. The question before the voters was a simple one. They were asked if they should join Russia or not. Some voters have a clear choice.
Russia forever has been our motherland, if you really want to know. And without it, we simply have no one left. Ukraine has long abandoned us.
I believe everything in life will change with the referendum. Because if we are finally united with Russia, everything will be completely different.
But is that the popular choice? Experts have doubts. Here is where the referendum vote is happening. Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. Together, the four regions make up around 18% of Ukraine's territory. Russia does not fully control any of the four regions, but reports claim Russia wants to annex this big chunk of Ukrainian territory anyway. There is precedent to back that argument. In 2014, when Russia took control of Crimea, a similar annexation vote was held. Official results claimed 97% of the voters backed joining Russia. But Ukraine and the West termed the referendum as a sham vote. Observers have expressed similar concerns about the referendums in eastern Ukraine. They are calling it a fake vote.
Well, there's not much to be organized when you want to hold a fake referendum, and the Russians already have experience of doing this. You remember back in 2014, they held a fake referendum in Crimea where people went and voted more or less at gunpoint. So when you're organizing a referendum in that sort of ambience, it can go quite quickly.
So what is Russia's endgame? The vote of annexation could be a turning point in the war. It would strengthen Russia's control over eastern Ukraine, allow Russian forces to recruit soldiers from the region, and mount a bigger offensive. World leaders have already denounced the vote. It remains to be seen how they'll deal with a more aggressive Russia. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
As the war drags on, there will be questions about Russia's military capabilities. Are their weapons invincible, or has Ukraine busted that myth? So far, the evidence is stacked against Russia. Their tanks are breaking down, their missiles are missing targets, and their fighter jets are largely missing in action. This could have huge implications for countries buying from Russia, countries like India. Since 2014, 55% of India's defense imports have been from Russia. Russian weapons make up 86% of India's arsenal. So diversification was the top priority, to buy weapons from elsewhere and produce locally wherever possible. Just to be clear here, this process began before the war in Ukraine. It's not about decoupling from Russia. It is about protecting India's own interests. The war only accelerated that process, and on that front, a major deal could be in the offing. The United States is looking to produce drones with India. The announcement was made by senior Pentagon official Eli Ratner. He is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Indo-Pacific. Let me first detail the plan. The US is looking at two possible weapon systems. One, drones launched from airplanes, and two, anti-drone defense systems. These will be produced in India for India's defense requirements. Some of it could also be exported to US allies in the neighborhood, especially in the Southeast Asia and South Asia regions. Ratner also hinted at more deals in the future. He said India and the US could co-produce major capabilities, but he did not say what they were. How exactly does such a deal help both sides? Let's have a look at the US first. For Washington, this is a chance to bring India over to their side. Remember, New Delhi has not condemned the war in Ukraine, neither has it criticized Russia. So Joe Biden's team is looking to change India's position, to pull New Delhi away from Moscow. Such joint defense deals could be a step in that direction. Secondly, it's a way to tackle China. Washington sees a strong India as a counterweight to China. And that's where these drones are important. They could be the key to surveillance along the line of actual control. Now coming to India, how does such a deal benefit India? We can think of three ways. Number one, it can boost India's domestic defense industry. Like I said, the plan is to produce these weapons in India, which means investments and jobs. Number two, diversification. It could reduce India's dependence on Russian arms, especially if the plan goes beyond drones to major capabilities, perhaps even missiles or artillery. And number three, a handy addition to India's arsenal. Ukraine has shown that drones will be key to modern warfare, so India is also keen to acquire them. In fact, talks are underway for another drone deal with the US, 30 Predator drones for $3 billion. Reports say the talks are in advanced stages. Now, as things stand, the US is the third largest supplier of arms to India. First is Russia, France comes second, and the US stands third. Total defense trade between India and the US is worth almost $21 billion. But India will not be keen on increasing that. Why is that? Because diversification does not just mean buying from elsewhere, it also means producing locally. Make in India is a key part of India's defense strategy. Indications are India's partners realize that. Recently, the French foreign minister was in New Delhi. She said France was not looking for defense deals, but joint defense projects. Now, the US is saying the same. They want to produce drones with India, in India. The question is, how must New Delhi see such overtures? Because let's face it, the Americans are not doing this out of their largesse. They have larger strategic goals, namely to get India on their side against Russia. But on that, India must be careful. Yes, local defense production is a desirable goal, but at what cost? Strategic autonomy is the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. That means keeping both sides at arm's length. So India must leverage its strategic importance to get the best deals. In this case, more defense ventures. At the same time, it must not get dragged into America's strategic games. I'll give you an example here. Earlier this month, the US announced a defense package for Pakistan, $450 million to upgrade the country's F-16 fleet. Do you see my point here? America is keeping its options open. So why shouldn't India? And that is the big takeaway from this drone deal. It should be welcomed as cooperation between two strategic partners, not as a sign of India's changing position. And talking about changing positions, is Israel planning a U-turn? The United Nations General Assembly is underway. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister made a big statement. Listen in.
An agreement with the Palestinians based on the two states for two people is the right thing for Israel's security, for Israel's economy, and for the future of our children. Peace is not a compromise. It is the most courageous decision we can make.
A peaceful settlement for one of the world's most controversial and longest-running conflicts. A two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, where Israelis and Palestinians can peacefully coexist. That is what Yair Lapid is pitching. This is a big shift because in recent years, Israeli leaders have largely ignored the idea altogether. In fact, no Israeli Prime Minister has even made a mention of it in the last 6 years. The last time it happened was in 2016, when Benjamin Netanyahu was in power. He had backed the two-state solution at the United Nations, but his commitment began to waver a year later. During his final years in office, Netanyahu made a shift. He tried to take control of more territory that Palestinians call their own. Consider this statement from 2018. I'm quoting, "There cannot be the removal of even one settlement, and that Israel insists on our continued control of all the territory to the west of the Jordan." Netanyahu had said this to a journalist in 2018. In the same interview, he went on to say that Israel will not evacuate a single person from the settlements. Netanyahu's successor, Naftali Bennett, was a hardliner as well. He openly opposed a separate state for Palestinians. Here is what he said about it last year. It would be a terrible mistake. I won't do that. There is no diplomatic process with the Palestinians, nor will there be one, quote unquote. Yair Lapid is opening the doors for diplomacy again. He has put the two-state solution back on the table. But is this move a non-starter? Can the Israeli Prime Minister make any serious progress considering the time he has left in office? In November, Israel will be holding fresh elections, their fifth one in 3 years. Netanyahu is eyeing a comeback. Opinion polls, in fact, are predicting he will win. A recent poll gives Netanyahu's coalition a narrow majority in the parliament. The former prime minister has already slammed Lapid's plans. Let me tell you what he said, quoting, Lapid is bringing the Palestinians back to the forefront of the world stage and putting Israel right into the Palestinian pit. Bennett, who is a coalition partner of Lapid, is also distancing himself. In a statement, he said, there is no place for a Palestinian state. Guess who else was listening to Lapid's remarks? Iran. Iran officially recognizes Palestine as a state. Tehran also backs armed Palestinian groups. For years, both Iran and Israel have been engaged in a proxy battle over Palestine. The Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, has reiterated his support to the Palestinians. He responded to Lapid's speech with a healthy dose of skepticism. Israel's conflict with Palestine is not just about territory. It's also a competition for influence between Israel and Iran. So whatever may be the outcome of Lapid's efforts, they will have a bearing on the shadow war between Israel and Iran. Do you know what is the golden rule of journalism? Never become the news. Journalists are supposed to be the messenger, the link between the newsmakers and the audience. But sometimes that distinction is lost. Sometimes journalists themselves become the news. We saw an example of this on Thursday. You may have heard about senior CNN anchor Christiane Amanpour. She was supposed to interview Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi in New York. The set was ready, the translators were ready, but Raisi never showed up. So Amanpour posted this picture on her Twitter page. As you can see, the chair opposite her is empty. The interview never happened. Now for the backstory. Raisi's team asked Amanpour to wear a headscarf while interviewing the leader. She refused, so the president was a no-show. That is basically the long story short. Right at the outset, let me say this, it is the journalist's personal decision to wear the headscarf or not. And we are not disputing her right to choose. We are inspecting whether that choice was right. Remember, there is a violent background to this debate. Hundreds of Iranian women have been protesting against their country's hijab mandate. They are burning their headscarves, even chopping their hair in protest. The government has responded with a violent crackdown. At last count, almost 36 people had been killed. The situation is escalating in the north of Iran. Security forces are reportedly using semi-heavy weapons on the protesters. Take a look at this video from the city of Babol. Protesters set fire to a billboard carrying the image of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Some women are taking off their hijab and burning it. In response, security forces have been stepping up that crackdown. They are using tear gas, water cannons, metal pellets to disperse those protesters. The internet has also been curbed in some parts. The idea is to stop this protest from spiraling. Meanwhile, a worrying trend is emerging in some cities. Counter rallies in favor of the hijab. Regime loyalists are taking out protests of their own. They are calling this controversy an American campaign. Both sides are emotionally charged and committed. So the fear is there could be street clashes. Christiane Amanpour could have grilled Ibrahim Raisi on all of this. On how a 22-year-old woman died in Iranian police custody. On how women are arrested for taking off their hijab. Instead, she gave up the interview because she was told to wear a headscarf. And just to be clear, Amanpour has donned the hijab before. Here is an example from 4 months ago. She was in Kabul interviewing Taliban leader Sirajuddin Haqqani. Quick side note, Haqqani is an international terrorist on the FBI's most wanted list. His regime is treating women as secondary citizens. Yet, Amanpour wore the hijab while interviewing him. So what changed this time? Well, she does have an explanation. Listen to this. I'm quoting, "We are in New York where there is no law or tradition regarding headscarves. I pointed out that no previous Iranian president has required this when I have interviewed them outside Iran," quote unquote. In other words, it's okay to wear headscarves if the law of the land calls for it. If not, it's your choice. Absolutely fair point. But our question is, what did this entire episode achieve? If it was about principles, it must be universal. Why make exceptions while reporting in Afghanistan or Iran? Last we checked, principles are not subject to international borders. They are subject to your personal resolve. And if it was about exposing Raisi, the world knows that the Iranian regime is suppressing women. We don't need a cancelled interview to realize that. On the contrary, that interview was required to hold the leader accountable, to ask him uncomfortable questions, to join the dots and expose the regressive agenda playing out in Iran. That is the whole point of such interviews. Why do you think female reporters agree to wear the hijab in Afghanistan or Iran? Why do you think journalists interview terrorist leaders and separatists? It's not because they agree with the ideology. It's because the story is worth telling. You may call it the greater good. Having said all this, let me be clear about one thing. Amanpour's decision does not make Ibrahim Raisi right. No world leader should dictate what female reporters can wear. But if they do, what is the best way to tackle it? By making them sweat in the hot seat, or by cancelling the interview and making headlines yourself? That is where Amanpour missed a chance. Iranian women are putting their lives on the line to take on Raisi's regime. They deserve to be on the front page. They deserve answers from their president. Instead, what do we see? A senior anchor making it to the headlines for a cancelled interview. I am not saying journalists must become robots without personal agency or principles. What I am saying is they must be consistent. If you choose principles over the story, be consistent about it. If you choose the story over principles, again, be consistent. And our next story is about something that consistently lands world leaders in trouble: hot mics. This time, South Korea's president was the victim. He was caught criticizing US lawmakers for stalling legislations, that too in pretty uncharitable terms. The government has come out with an interesting justification, but unfortunately for them, nobody is buying it. So what exactly was the president caught saying, and why do leaders repeatedly end up spilling on live mics? Our next report telling you.
The microphone. It can be every politician's dream tool. But if they are not careful, it can also be their worst enemy. Just ask South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol. On Thursday, he met with US President Joe Biden. The two leaders talked about electric vehicle subsidies in the United States. After the chat, Yoon was caught mouthing some not-so-diplomatic words. Just like that, the mic became his enemy. President Yoon did not want his statements to become public. It was just a frank chat with his aides. Unfortunately for him, there was a hot mic in the vicinity. Everything he said was broadcast to the world. Soon, the controversy snowballed into a diplomatic incident. South Korea's opposition accused Yoon of tarnishing the country's image. His office went into damage control. The Korean government says Yoon was not talking about the United States. They say he did not even utter the word Biden. What he did say was a Korean word that sounds similar to the US president's name. Full marks for creativity, but the damage was already done. Hot mics have landed leaders in hot water before. Remember this little chat from the 2019 NATO summit? That was Emmanuel Macron with Justin Trudeau and Boris Johnson, heads of government by the day, teenage gossipers by the night. They were discussing Donald Trump's impromptu press conferences in London. Needless to say, Trump wasn't impressed. Joe Biden himself had a hot mic moment in January this year. A reporter questioned him about the rising inflation numbers.
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son.
And sometimes the hot mic moments are even more controversial, like what happened in 2012. Then US President Barack Obama was meeting outgoing Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. They were discussing missile defense treaties when this happened.
My last election, yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah. I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and Leslie.
Nothing to see here, just two nuclear powers casually discussing missile treaties. Such hot mic moments often dominate the news cycle for a few days. The late-night hosts make jokes out of them, but 1 week later, people move on. Until the next leader takes over the hot mic. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Time now to quickly tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
A blast outside a mosque attended by Taliban members in the Afghan capital of Kabul killed at least 4 people minutes after Friday prayers ended. At least 73 migrants drowned as a boat they boarded in Lebanon sinks off Syria's coast, the deadliest such shipwreck from Lebanon in recent years. Police have arrested 48 people for allegedly starting forest fires in France during the summer, where fires ravaged more than 65,000 hectares. Belgium will push through with a decades-old plan to shut down a nuclear reactor, despite calls for a rethink given fears of power blackouts this winter. Several hundred protesters gathered in a Tokyo park demanding the cancellation of the state funeral for Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Tesla recalls nearly 1.1 million cars in the US because the windows might close too fast and pinch people's fingers. British Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng presents mini-budget and announces cuts in income tax and stamp duty in a bid to boost growth. The tax cuts are the biggest since 1988 in a major shift of economic policy. Hundreds of students protested outside Parliament House in Wellington, demanding more action on climate change, joining other countries in global protests. Kylian Mbappe and Oliver Giroud were on target as France secured a 2-0 home victory over Austria in the UEFA Nations League. 35-year-old Giroud became France's oldest goal scorer in history with his header in the second half. Boston Celtics have suspended head coach Ime Udoka for the entire NBA season for violating team policies by having an intimate relationship with a female co-worker. Joe Mazzulla is likely to take over as Boston's interim coach.
On to our next story. Let me ask you a question. Do you know which is the safest mode of transport? Statistically, airplanes. When we board a plane, we trust the pilots to ensure a safe journey. Turns out, our trust may be misplaced. A new survey has found that 66% of Indian pilots snooze in the cockpit. What are the risks associated with these findings, and how much of the blame do the air carriers take? Our next report telling you.
I have a question for you. Do you doze off while taking a flight? Well, guess what? Your pilot does too. A new survey says 66% of Indian pilots doze off in the cockpit. A startling revelation that has left the aviation sector worried. The survey was conducted by an NGO called Safety Matters Foundation. They checked the level of fatigue among Indian pilots. Fatigue that usually leads to daytime sleepiness. Nearly 542 pilots took part in the survey. So what does the data say? 41% say they suffered from daytime sleepiness. 54% suffered from severe excessive daytime sleepiness. 66% of pilots said they had experienced micro-sleep. That means just unintentionally dozing off. 31% admit to having a close call while flying. But why are our pilots so tired? The answer is back-to-back flights. Pilots are assigned continuous flights in the morning. This results in growing fatigue. This fatigue is one of the biggest contributing factors for the sleepiness. Pilots say they mostly wake up around 3 a.m. This is the time when the body needs the most sleep. So clearly that adds to the fatigue. Others blame the lifestyle of these pilots, which includes partying and alcohol. Some even cite the pandemic as a reason. Airlines are currently working with reduced workforce. This means pilots now have to fly for longer hours. But regardless of the reason, this survey is concerning. This is because fatigue is one of the main reasons causing airline accidents. In fact, fatigue is a known factor in a lot of aviation accidents. It was a contributing factor in the 2010 Mangalore crash, one that ended up killing 158 people. Residual sleepiness and impaired judgment contributed to the accident, both of which were caused because the pilots were tired. The cockpit voice recorder indicated that the captain was asleep for over 90 minutes. So what can the Indian Civil Aviation Authority do? To begin with, putting in place fatigue risk management systems. Currently, there are no rules drafted to manage fatigue. For airlines, they should hire more pilots instead of overworking the existing ones, because this is one place where dozing off could be a matter of life and death.
On to some turbulence in the world of sport. A revolt in Spain is making headlines. The women's football team wants the head coach sacked. This is a full-blown player mutiny, and it is unprecedented. What's brewing there? Our next report telling you more.
The Spanish team is among the best in the business. In fact, women's football in the country is more popular than it's ever been, with club matches drawing record crowds. But on Thursday, the national team was making headlines for a different reason. What happened was unprecedented. Spanish players were up in arms against their head coach and issued a threat to the country's football federation. Here's what happened. 15 players wrote to the Spanish Federation. Their demand: the head coach, Jorge Vilda, should be sacked. In an email, the players said they will resign if he is not axed from his position. They insisted that his management was significantly affecting their mental and emotional health. How did the Spanish Federation react? They called the players' move a grave infraction. In an age where sporting administrations usually bow down to player power, the Spanish Federation's response triggered a row. The Federation said it will not reach out to players who do not want to wear the Spain shirt. It condemned the players for questioning the continuity of the head coach and said that only committed players will be used, even if that means working with young players. The federation did not stop there. It added that the players won't be allowed to return to the national team unless they ask for forgiveness. The team's biggest star, World Player of the Year Alexia Putellas, is not among those asking for Wilder's ouster. With Spain's next match being just over 2 weeks away, it puts the federation in a tough spot. Player mutinies are not new in the world of sport, but rarely do they become public. Australia's T20 World Cup winning coach, Justin Langer, resigned following leaked reports of players calling his methods too intense. A similar situation unfolded in India back in 2017. Then India cricket captain Virat Kohli had a fallout with head coach Anil Kumble. Although no other player took any stand on the matter, Kumble also resigned, calling his position untenable. In the latest case, in Spain, the players' move could backfire. With the federation and coach seemingly refusing to budge from their stance, the 15 players could end up putting their own international careers in jeopardy. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Our final story is about a major breakthrough for the Make in India project. In recent weeks, there has been a growing interest in India's indigenously developed fighter Tejas. Several countries want to buy it. What makes the Tejas a viable prospect? Our correspondent Siddharth MP paid a visit to the Indian Air Force Station in Tamil Nadu to understand for himself. Here's a detailed report.
It's the lightest fighter aircraft in the world. Fully loaded, it weighs all of 13.5 tons or 13,500 kilograms. It can travel at Mach 1.6, which is 1.6 times the speed of sound, or nearly 2,000 kilometers per hour. It's an all-weather single-engine multi-role light combat aircraft. To top it all, this aircraft is made in India by the state-owned aerospace and defense company Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. It is a fact that the Tejas took decades to design and develop. The Tejas program began in the 1980s. The aircraft had its first flight in 2001. Thereafter, it took 15 years for further modifications and testing. However, it is a proven, robust and reliable aircraft. Ample testimony to this fact is that the aircraft hasn't had a single accident in more than 5,000 development flights and in thousands of hours of operational flying.
It is the lightest combat aircraft in the world. One of the highlights of this aircraft is the control laws, which is known as colloquially as the fly-by-wire of any aircraft. So what is the fly-by-wire? What it basically does, if I want to explain it to the layman, is that between an input that the pilot gives and output that is reflected at the control surfaces, there's a computer. That computer is nothing but has captured the entire mathematical model of the aircraft, and based on what the pilot demands, the aircraft is able to give it.
According to the Indian government, many countries including the US, Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Egypt and Argentina have shown interest in Tejas. While it is a made-in-India aircraft, the Tejas also features a significant number of components from US, British and Israeli manufacturers. Tejas can also fire armaments from India, Russia and Israel. So, if and when the Tejas is purchased by another country, all the foreign component manufacturers will also benefit in the process. India currently operates 2 squadrons, that is 32 aircraft. However, air power and capabilities are meant to be constantly upgraded. India is also working on Tejas Mark 1A and Tejas Mark 2.
Actually, the aircraft is great, but in spite of that, there is always scope for improvement. So, if we ever find certain aspects on which we can make it better, in which improvements can be made, we definitely convey to the designers, and the designers till date have been extremely motivated, and they've ensured that our requirements have not only been met but at many times been surpassed to make this aircraft even better than what it was originally. And in the same line, we expect that the Mark 1 Alphas and the Mark 2s will definitely make good the requirements and in many aspects surpass the desired capabilities.
The international interest in the Tejas is an acknowledgement of India's efforts at building an indigenous fighter. Operating out of Air Force Station Sulur since 2018, the Tejas aircraft play a crucial role in peninsular India.
Tejas is a highly capable aircraft, and as far as the Tejas squadrons, the two squadrons, the flying daggers and the flying bullets that operate of Sulur are concerned, they can be called fairly as the defenders of peninsular India, because when they operate from here, their area of responsibility is pretty much from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands on the eastern side and also Lakshadweep Islands on the western side. So the Tejas aircraft that operate out of Air Force Station Sulur in Tamil Nadu are actually the defenders of India's peninsula.
Having succeeded with the first variant of Tejas, India's aerospace industry has gained significant experience and learnt valuable lessons. This could prove crucial in making India more and more self-reliant in crucial defence technologies. With video journalist Surendra from Air Force Station Sulur, Siddharth MP, WION World is One.
And on that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas. We're leaving you with Gravitas images as always. Thanks very much for watching.
Je shampoo pour montrer la